Shabbat Shalom. This week we have progressed in our parashas. We've survived the flood of Noah in last week's parasha, and we've jumped forward another 10 generations, and we now encounter one of the most important men in the history of mankind, Avraham Avinu, Abraham, our father. He's famous for many things, but one of the things that he's most famous for is that he is the father of all monotheistic faiths. That he is the one that believed in the one true God. I'm going to be honest with you, that always confuses me when we say that, because in this week's parasha, we see him encounter someone else who also believes in the one true God. We see Melchizedek, who is a priest already in Salem, in Jerusalem. So there must be other people in this world that believe in the one true God after the Tower of Babel got split. But anyway, we still attribute the modern act of faith in one true God and the spreading of this belief in the one true God. We attribute this to Abraham, our father, who is a big person. The parasha this week tells us a little bit about him, about the promises that God made to Abraham, that regardless of his age, that he will one day have many descendants, and through him all the nations of the world will be blessed, and they will inherit their own land, regardless of what age he is, right? And in children's church, we always used to sing this song, and everyone knows that song about Abraham. Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let us praise the Lord. Right hand, left foot, right foot. Clap your hands, nod your head, turn around. Anyway, that whole fun thing. Right, I hope you guys remember that song as well, right? And I used to sing along to the song, and I used to think about this guy, Father Abraham. He was a big deal. I mean, if we're singing, in the church chapel, all of these kids are singing the song about Father Abraham, and we're all doing the Macarena like he used to do it. He must have been a big deal. And he's the father of all mankind is what I thought when we used to sing the song. So, Abraham was a pretty important dude. And he's a massive figure for us, not just in history, but in the understanding and the practice of our faith and our belief system. He is one of the most influential role models in the Bible. And in fact, throughout the New Testament, we're encouraged to try and emulate Abraham to the best of our abilities, right? Yeshua tells us that if we want to be considered sons of Abraham, right, sons of this promise, then we actually need to do the deeds that Abraham himself did. We need to walk in the footsteps of our father Abraham. Paul likewise points out to us that to become a son of Abraham, we need to be, it's more than just a genealogical statement that you are directly descended from Abraham, but you actually need to do what Abraham himself did. Just singing the song in that children's rhyme isn't enough to be considered a son of Abraham. Our actions need to match the actions and the deeds of our father Abraham. So Abraham as a person, he was a one-of-a-kind man. To encounter someone that's Abraham-like in your lifetime is a very rare thing. Because if you read the parasha this week, you'll start to realize how Abraham befriends everyone around him no matter where he goes. In fact, Abraham is the world's first missionary. Proper missionary that goes from his father's home and land and he leaves. Which, by the way, has always plagued me a bit, because we make this big deal of Abraham leaving his father's house, and he took this big step to leave where he grew up. But how old was he when he left? He was in the 70s when he left. I mean, can you imagine being the parent of Abraham? This kid's never going to leave the house. Right? He's not even going to get his own grandchildren by the looks of it, because Sarah herself is getting just as old. Right? But Abraham left Haran. And as he was on his way, he influenced everyone he encountered. Right? The Torah tells us that he left Haran and he took with him all the persons that he acquired in Haran. And actually in Hebrew it says all the souls that he acquired in Haran. So even while he was in Haran, he acquired souls, meaning that he influenced people and taught them about the one true God. Right? The Midrash and our modern sages, they look at this and say that Abraham actually converted a whole bunch of people to the belief in the one true God. In this week's parasha, when Abraham goes to battle against Amraphel, it says he takes with him 318 of his men. Some rabbis say it's not just his men, it's his actual disciples that go with him and fight this war to defeat the massive army. And that shows you how big Abraham's household was. If he had 318 fighting men with him in this battle, he had a pretty big tent, caravan that was traveling in the desert on the way to the promised land. And in that war, what we see about Abraham is that Abraham helps the kings of the provinces around him, because Abraham was just a sojourner, right? He didn't have a spot yet where he was dwelling. And he befriended the kings around him to the point where they came and called on him for help, and he helped them to overcome this mighty odds of this other great kingdoms of Amraphel and his coalition, to defeat them. And in doing that, another thing that he does is he saves his nephew Lot. Right? So once again, Abraham is this guy that epitomizes the idea of showing love to your neighbor and to those around you. So much so that Abraham himself even seems to have befriended Melchizedek in Jerusalem, because Melchizedek comes out after he wins this war to share break some bread with him and have some wine. They must have been in the encounter as well. Abraham seems to have been very well known in his day and age. So Abraham was a super social kind of guy, friends with everyone. He really loved his neighbors. And it's those kind of guys who make good missionaries, by the way, right? These are the guys that you want to send out. My dad is one of them as well. My dad is, he's cut out for this kind of job. He will go into a place and go and look for people that he's never met before and start up a conversation so that he can get them to talk about God and show them something about God. He can't go to the shops without calling one of the packers to say, hey, do you know what this kosher sign on the back of this thing means? And he explains to them what kosher means and how God has revealed it to us. So you get certain people that are like this, right? Even this week, my dad went and got together all the Dominis here from Silverton, and he's got them together with the police force in Silverton to make a day every year where all our Dominis are going to pray for our neighborhood, that our neighborhood can be safe and that we can overcome all the spiritual barriers that we are facing when our own societies are becoming like that of Sodom and Gomorrah. My poor mother, she is a long-suffering servant, because she hasn't had to prepare the house for decades for a visit from the Dominis. But as you can see this week, she had to do it. She had to get the floral arrangements, make sure there's cook and tea for the Dominis, and welcome them onto our stoep. Now, I am not that type of person. I am as antisocial as they come. If I could sit in my little house or in my shell all day long, I would do that. So sometimes I feel that I can't match up to the greatness of someone like Abraham, or even that level of righteousness that Abraham achieves. But does that mean that I am a failure? Just because my personality type isn't the same as Abraham? It can't be. God created each of us the way we are for a reason. And there are many different roles in the kingdom. Just like Paul tells us, there are many different parts to the body. If Messiah is the head, you might be an arm, you might be a leg, you might be a pinky, which you think is insignificant, or a pinky toe. But without that pinky toe, a human being can't balance properly. So every one of us has different kinds of ways that we can pursue righteousness in our lives. Right? So today, I want to look at a different character from our parashah. A smaller character. Not the mighty Abraham who we always look to and always try and emulate. But I want to look at someone that we can learn a lesson from in righteousness. Now lately I've been doing this a lot. I've been looking at abstract characters in our parashahs and abstract concepts from our parashahs. I mean, if you guys just come to our shul on a Saturday for our outdoor services, you'll know this, right? Because every Saturday I give another extra vort on the week's parashah, a different topic. And I usually choose these out there topics, these topics that are not so mainstream. For example, just this past week, I was exploring and flirting with the idea that Noah escaped from the planet Mars. And he came to Earth on a spaceship-like ark. Right? And 2 weeks back, I was dissecting an etrog so we can learn something about being thick-skinned like an etrog. So, it's something else. It's a special thing that we enjoy here on Sabbath as well, now that we are doing our services outside. So today, I want to look at this week's parashah and look at an abstract character from the parashah and see if there's a lesson we can learn from this person. So who else in this parashah can we learn a lesson from about righteousness? Other than Melchizedek, other than Sarah, other than his kings. What about Abraham's nephew, Lot? How many of you, when I say the name Lot or talk about the character Lot, think of him as a righteous individual? I would vote that there's very few of you. While our sages, they look at Lot with two different shades. right? Many consider Lot to be a wicked scoffer, someone who follows his own desires and only takes what his immediate eye sees and desires. But some of our other sages actually look at Lot as a righteous man. And the reason why I want to look at Lot as a righteous man today is because our apostle Peter did so as well. Listen to this quote from 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 7 as he mentions the righteousness of Lot over and over again. Peter says, "And he, God, condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, reducing them to ashes and to ruin, as a warning to those in the future who would live ungodly lives. But he rescued Lot, a righteous man, who was distressed by the debauchery of those unprincipled people, for the wicked deeds that the righteous man, Lot, saw and heard as he lived among them, tormented his righteous heart day after day. So the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and how to hold the wicked until the day of judgment." Peter calls Lot a righteous man 3 times. It's quite a lot for a person like him, right? And where does Peter get this idea from? Well, I'm going to suggest that he doesn't just make it up and suck it out of his thumb, that there is a basis for this. As I said before, our sages have got split opinions about Lot. So today, I only want to concentrate on Lot and the opinions that say that Lot was in fact a righteous man. I'm not saying that he was a righteous man. I'm just basing this study today, this teaching today, on the ideas that Lot was a righteous man. So all the bad things that we know about Lot, all the bad things we expect to say about Lot, let's put them one side just for this week and think a bit differently. Try and see the good in Lot in this week's study. Now, the Midrash actually tells us that Lot was a true disciple of Abraham. Not only did he look like Abraham to the point where people actually would mistake Lot for Abraham, he had the same physical features, much like we see when Isaac gets born, right? Isaac looks exactly like Abraham. Apparently Lot looked the same. But in addition to that, Lot also practiced the same level of hospitality that Abraham also practiced. And that's a big thing, right? Because that's what Abraham was known for, was his hospitality and his chesed. And in next week's parasha, we're going to read about the story of the angels, the 2 angels, as they leave Abraham. They go to the city of Sodom. And what happens? They are met there at the gate by Lot. And what does Lot do? He's very Abrahamic. He invites them to his home. He shows them hospitality. And at first they refuse it and say, "Don't worry, we're going to sleep in the town square." But Lot persistently warns them and tells them, "No, you guys are coming home with me. My wife has got a cholent cooking. You guys are going to sleep in the beds. The kids will sleep on the couch. It's going to be a nice time. Don't worry your sore feet. Come and stay at my house." So Lot has an element of what he's learned from Abraham with him. And in showing the hospitality to the travelers, it's almost as if it's a little bit greater than Abraham's hospitality. Because showing hospitality to someone in your own tent, when you're out there in the middle of nowhere and you've got this massive caravan of people, that's one thing. But showing hospitality to someone when you're living in the city of Sodom, where it is actually illegal to show hospitality to someone, that is hospitality on a different level, because he was literally risking his life and the life of his family by accommodating those angels in his house, which we actually see happen in next week's parasha, where they want to kill his family and him to get to the angels. But now, I'm not saying that we should compare Lot's righteousness with Abraham's righteousness, because they are clearly on 2 different levels without a doubt, right? I'm not trying to say that. And for the plain reading of the parasha, actually, it shows us that when Lot gets saved from Sodom and Gomorrah, the plain reading tells us that the reason why he was saved from Sodom and Gomorrah was actually for Abraham's sake. Because the text says that God remembered Abraham and got Lot out of there. But here's the thing. When we look at someone like Abraham and his level of righteousness and the good deeds that Abraham did, sometimes you might get scared. Not everyone is able to pursue that level of righteousness that Abraham carried. Others have different situations, different environments that they find themselves in, where living a kosher lifestyle or keeping all the commandments isn't as easy as it was for Abraham. And I think these type of people can look to Lot as a prime example, as a role model of how he lived in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, yet even while he was there in that wicked city, surrounded by all this wickedness and debauchery, even there, Peter tells us, he stayed righteous. Maybe not the most righteous person in the world, but in that situation, he remained righteous. Now, when it comes to something like righteousness, you've got to understand that there are different levels of righteousness. Yeshua, of course, he's completely righteous, right? And God willing, we can one day be like him and emulate our master. But we are really going to struggle to reach that level of righteousness. That's why what we do instead is we rather rely as disciples of his on his merits and righteousness for our behalf, right? When we get baptized and mikvahed into his name and take on the full yoke of discipleship, luckily we are resurrected in his righteousness as well. But that doesn't absolve us from living righteous lives from here on out, right? The book of James is very clear about this, that our faith mustn't just be something of belief, it must be proved by our actions, and that will be through our righteousness that we do in this world. So there are different levels of righteousness. I want to draw upon mystic Judaism that explains that there are in fact 5 types of levels, of types of people when it comes to the scale of righteous and the wicked, right? Because to be completely righteous, sometimes it's out of our grasp. And that's okay, because there's a scale, right? It's not either righteous or wicked. There is some area in between. So I want to read to you guys this idea that there are 5 levels. It says, there are 5 types of individuals within mankind. 3 are holy and 2 are sinful. So at the top of the log, so to speak, you've got something or someone known as a tzaddik gamur. A tzaddik gamur is someone who is completely and fully righteous, right? That's top notch. Complete tzaddik. But then just under that level, you've got someone who is known as a tzaddik she'eino gamur, which is an incomplete tzaddik. Still a tzaddik though, still righteous, but they are incomplete. They're not completely righteous. They still have some struggles within them, some challenges. Then you've got the third level, which is getting closer to the sinful levels, which is known as the Bein Oni. The Bein Oni we are familiar with our studies of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We've got those 3 books, right? The book of the righteous, the book of the in-betweeners, the Bein Oni, and then you've got the book of the wicked and the sinners. So you've got the Bein Oni. They are those who are drawn equally to God as much as they are drawn to sin. They are really in between. Let's go 50-50. Those are those guys, the Bein Oni. And then you've got the bottom one, the bottom 2 levels, which are known as the Rasha She'eino Gamur, which is someone who is mostly wicked. Still has a little spark inside them, right? They still, even now and then, feel a bit of conscience. And then you have the completely wicked person, the Rasha Gamur, the completely wicked person. So there are different levels of righteousness, you know. When the Torah says someone is righteous, it doesn't mean he was like the Messiah himself, or he was completely sinless. Righteousness is more than just that, right? It's not so black and white. There is some area in between, some grayness when it comes to this. So Lot, I think, we can put him into either that middle one of the Bein Oni, or I personally think he falls in the second level, which is called a tzaddik she'einu gamur, a not complete tzaddik, but still a tzaddik. So this is how they explain it. The second individual is a tzaddik she'eino gamur, who is primarily attracted to morality, right? He sees the physical things around him and he's attracted to it. When Abraham says, all right, Lot, you choose which land you want, what does Lot say? He says, yeah, I'll take that luscious land over there, right, on the way to Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham offers it to him and he says, well, that's the one that I want. He also possesses a weak drive for evil and sin. So he does have a little bit of a drive for materiality, for evil and sin. Every now and then he does commit a sin. He doesn't, make the right choice. But his desire for the holy is supreme, and he consistently chooses virtue. Within his heart, the advocate for holiness is loudest, so it is said to rule over his evil inclination. Peter said this about Lot, that his heart, he had a righteous heart, right? Such an individual is also called, there's another name for this individual, a tzaddik vera lo, which means a tzaddik who suffers. Or literally translated, it's a tzaddik whom evil is his, meaning that he has control over his evil inclination. It goes on to explain he has some evil in him, ra, but lo, it is his, since he has control over his evil inclination. And honestly speaking, I think that majority of people can try to relate to Lot a lot more than they can try to relate to Abraham, because we also struggle to overcome our desires for morality. But at heart, we are fully committed to doing the right thing. You know, when we look at the 10 tests of Abraham, which start in this week's parasha and carry on to next week's parasha, there are some rabbis that suggest Abraham passed all 10 tests with flying colors. That's unrelatable to us. We're never going to pass all tests with flying colors. So in looking at the person of Lot and his righteousness, I think there is something that we really can relate to. And there is in fact a midrash that says that Lot was saved from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah because of an act of righteousness that he himself performed towards Abraham in the past. And this midrash shows us this exact same concept, that Lot might have been a tzaddik, but he might not have been a complete tzaddik, but he was righteous enough to have control over his own evil desire. So here's the quote from the Midrash Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah 51, verse 6. So it's based upon the verse in the Bible that says, "So it was when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham. So he sent Lot from the upheaval." Right? So we read it generally and we think it's because of Abraham that God saved Lot. This is what the Midrash says. It asks the question, what bearing has God's remembrance of Abraham upon the rescue of Lot? Why are they connected? Why must remembrance of Abraham have anything to do with Lot being saved? It answers, he remembered that Lot knew that Sarah was Abraham's wife, and that when he heard that Abraham said in Egypt regarding Sarah, that she is my sister, when Abraham told that little lie to Pharaoh's men, Lot did not betray him because he had sympathy with him. For this reason, God had mercy upon Lot. Because Lot didn't call out Abraham's lie in front of Pharaoh's men. So because Lot had self-control over his evil inclination at the incident with Sarah in Egypt, because of that, this Midrash is telling us, God had mercy upon Lot. His self-control there actually spared Abraham's life. And because of that, measure for measure, later, God remembered Abraham for the sake of sparing Lot's life when the city of Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. So you might be asking the question, why is this considered such a great act of self-control when he didn't spill the beans to Pharaoh's men about Abraham's lie about Sarah? Well, the commentators explain as follows, that by keeping quiet, Lot forfeited any benefit that he himself would have received from Pharaoh by unveiling Abraham's ruse. Lot was in fact being tested as well at that point by the temptation of taking all the reward from Pharaoh for himself. So in this parasha, it's not just Abraham that gets tested through his 10 tests. Lot is also undergoing a test. And over there, Lot passed the test. By keeping quiet, Lot took upon himself the risk of being an accessory to Abraham's ruse, and he could have borne the same punishment if Abraham was caught. Lot actually took a risk, put his own life at risk by going along with Abraham's ruse at that stage. I mean, can you imagine what Lot must have done while they were in Egypt? Because he was, it was Abraham's nephew. So if Abraham says, Sarah is my sister, and then they're going to ask Lot, well, who are you? And he has to, play along and try and make sure that this family feud is actually sorted out without giving away the truth there. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? That doesn't really sound like such a great act of righteousness on Lot's behalf. How on earth can that, Lot just, trying to save his own bacon, how can that be the thing that saves him from destruction in Sodom and Gomorrah. After all, in next week's parasha, an even greater act of tzedakah that Lot performs is the one where he accommodates the angels in the city of Sodom, where it is a law that you're not allowed to show hospitality unto people. Why isn't he rewarded for that instead? Why does the Midrash choose the reward to come from this incident where he doesn't spill the beans on Sarah? So Rav Dessler comes along and explains it to us through a parable. He says, a Jew who is raised in a strictly observant home is not often faced with difficult decisions of Torah observance. Their observance becomes a habit unto this person. But when such a person faces temptation outside of his conditioning and outside of his regular habit, then he may succumb to the trial because he has never been exposed to such a trial. When Lot showed compassion to the angels by housing them in their visit to Sodom, he did it because that's what he learned his whole life long living with Abraham and Sarah, who were known for their hospitality. To Lot, showing hospitality to them was part of the habit that he learned from living with Abraham and Sarah. So he doesn't get rewarded for that. But when he was faced with a test revealing Abraham's ruse to Pharaoh, that was his test of his own character, to see if he would be overcome by the temptation of his own evil inclination or not. And Lot passed that test. It was a genuine expression of his own goodness, and therefore he was saved in that merit. So this idea of Lot having his own test, being among the Sodomites and the Gomorrites, whatever we call these ites, that was his own test he had to go through. It wasn't in perfect conditions among righteous people. It was a different kind of test. And it reminds me a lot of Yeshua's stay here on earth, his first coming, and what Yeshua did as well. Yeshua's purpose in his first coming was that he didn't come for the righteous. He said so himself, right? He came for the sinners, to turn them back to God. He wasn't chilling among the righteous people, saying, what's up, my homies, we're going to make it to the world to come. Because then there was no point of him coming, right? He said to the righteous, they've already got their share in the world to come. He came to the ones who were so-called sick, the ones who actually needed a doctor to provide them with a remedy. He came to the lost sheep of Israel, not to the obedient, healthy sheep, because they were already righteous. He came to those who needed to change. Similarly, Lot found himself in the city of Sodom, an environment that bred these type of sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes, sinners of every kind. But even in that environment, Peter tells us, Lot stayed righteous, even if it irked his heart on a daily basis of what was happening around him. Some Midrashim actually tell us how Lot and his family actively tried to influence the people of Sodom to change their ways, even though it was against the law. For example, there's a story that tells us one of Lot's daughters, apparently he had 5 daughters, this fifth one, this extra one, she's got some funny name, Lilith or something. She actually one day, a poor man came wandering into the city of Sodom, and he went to the town square to try and beg for food. And he lay there next to the water source of the city so he could at least get some water. And what happened was the people knew, of course, it's a law. You're not supposed to feed this guy, because if you feed him, then more beggars are going to come. And who's going to feed all the beggars, So the people said, let him lie there and die and rot away. And then his remains, his body lying there, will be a sign for any other poor people trying to beg in our city. But what happened? This guy didn't seem to die, and his face didn't seem to get thinner, and he didn't seem to lose any of his complexion. Why is this? Because Lot's daughter, every morning, she would secretly feed the guy. So he was lying next to the water source in the town, so every morning, when she would take her pot and she would walk down to go fetch water, she would hide some bread inside the pot. And as she would bow down to scoop up water, she'd take out the bread and give it to the poor man, so that the poor man had some food to eat. Eventually, the Sodomites went and sent spies to try and watch this guy 24/7 to see why he isn't dying, because he's going to attract more beggars. And they eventually caught her and they put her to death as well. So Lot's family actually did try to influence the people of that city. So I'm aware that Lot isn't considered the hero of righteousness, that we don't usually look towards him as an example of righteousness, but he can be my kind of hero, right? Someone that we can actually relate to and emulate without too much effort and too much concern. Lot wasn't completely righteous. He wasn't a tzaddik gamur. And in next week's parasha, we're going to read about some of the stuff that he did, right? Which makes him sound like quite a dodgy person. But when Abraham argues for the city of Sodom not to be destroyed with God, saying if will a righteous person be found? Sure, Lot doesn't get considered as a righteous person for the sake of saving the city, right? Yet, God still brings Lot and his family out of the city before it gets destroyed. He doesn't destroy Lot along with the rest of the wicked of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And in fact, Lot actually gets rewarded for his righteousness. How so? Well, our sages point out that there must have been something special about Lot. Because through that weird, unsanctioned intercourse between him and his daughter in next week's parasha, comes the tribe of the Moabites, who, by the way, themselves weren't great, right? Judaism doesn't really have a good relationship with the Moabites, right? But from the Moabites comes forth one particular Moabite, the most famous one, Ruth. And Ruth, who eventually marries Boaz, becomes the mother in the line, in the lineage of the Messiah himself, of King David and all his descendants after him. So there's something about Lot that he got rewarded for. There was a righteousness that he got carried. And even that little bit of righteousness, even though Lot didn't have a lot of righteousness, that righteousness that he carried was enough to merit the Messiah coming into this world. It's an amazing thing to think about. So not everyone can match up to the lofty level of Avraham Avinu, our father. But looking at Lot, we can learn that that doesn't mean that we are doomed. So how does one go about this journey of trying to pursue righteousness? And we're still supposed to be aiming for that goal of being a completely righteous person. That is still our goal, right? We shouldn't set the bar down here. How does a person go about reaching that point, even if we might not ever reach it? One day at a time. Incrementally. Start by overcoming your own battles like Lot. Defeating your own evil inclination and not succumbing to the sins of the environment around you. And when that final judgment day does come, when what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah with the fire and the hail, when that does come and happen on a worldwide scale to this entire earth, then our small acts of righteousness, overcoming our evil inclination, that will connect us to our completely righteous Messiah, the Tzaddik Gamur. And then God will remember us for his sake, sparing us from the ultimate destruction. So let's try and do everything we can in our own capacity in this world that we live in, even if we're not as righteous as Abraham, so that we will merit to be put with Messiah in his basket of righteousness. Shabbat Shalom.